Peace be with you. So I wanted to make this video about relationships from a Muslim or perspective of the Quran and try to tie those into society at large and how important relationships between males and females are in respect to the society as a whole. Now, there is some recognition of a problem that has arisen in the Western society in regards to relationships between men and women. For example, you frequently hear people say, well, teach men not to rape. That is a recognition of sexual assaults that happen too frequently in Western society. And I'm not talking about, when this phrase is mentioned, they're not talking about violent rape where the woman is, kidnapped off the street and raped. What they're talking about is women being taken advantage of, either when they're inebriated or drunk or under some other circumstances. And rightfully so, the solution is teach men not to rape, right? That's the right general idea, but the way the society approaches that or tries to implement that is absolutely wrong. Firstly, you can't implement that by leaving religion out of it. There's just no way you can do that. Now, of course, normal men don't rape. Normal men don't just kidnap women off the streets and rape them. But young men, especially young men, are predators, especially men without any faith. Men who live in the moment, and especially young, immature men who will do anything to sleep with a woman. And that is just a fact of life. And society judges them less than it judges women. And I recognize that unfairness, and I will touch on that because it is very important to understand that in society at large, because of this inherent unfairness, men, not always, but men are predominantly the predators and women are the victim. Now, when you look at the predator-prey relationship, you have to understand that you can't teach lion not to hunt a gazelle. It's much easier to teach the gazelle to avoid the lion. So when people give, and I have a daughter, so when people, especially men, when they give their daughters advice to avoid certain situations, that's not because they're trying to be patriarchal, but because they're trying to protect them, because we as men know what men are like, especially men without faith. Men without faith are ruled by desire, and that desire is very predictable. Once they hit puberty, men have very predictable desire, and women have to understand that, and those men who do not have reverence and fear of God cannot be trusted. Women just have to understand that, otherwise they will be the victims. No matter how much they want to change society, the only way you can change the hearts of men is through faith. And the fact that even though we recognize the problem in the society, that we are trying to drive faith, true faith. I don't mean the faith that's based on customs, but I'm talking about scripture. And I'll get into that in a second. But to try to drive that out of society just means you will never get to your goal, and society will always be corrupt. And in a corrupt society, it is the women that are always the victims. So it's very, very important to recognize that fact. Before I continue, I want to quote George Washington in regards to this when excluding faith out of society. He said in his farewell address in 1779, I believe, and let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education, to minds of peculiar structure, reason, and experience, both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. So what he is saying, and what he's saying is true, and what he is saying is like, be careful thinking that morality can be preserved without religion. Whatever higher education you think is going to do, it won't do that, because reason and experience forbid us to believe that. So we've been through this before. We aren't the first people that wanted to have a godless society. That happened before. And we aren't the first people with these theories. That happened before. And we know they all fail. The only way you can have morality and you can keep men and women safe from each other, preserving the family structure, preserving the nation structure, is if both are moral, and religion is indispensable to that. Because higher education is going to teach you how to make money, how to make a living. But it is religion. And when I say religion, I don't mean an organization that is full of hypocrites. Whether you consider Islam or Christianity, I'm not meaning, I'm talking about the moral code that is sincerely followed by people who are faithful, sincerely faithful to God, not hypocrites who claim adherence to an organization such as Islam or Christianity or whatever else we've conjured up over the years. So, the only people that are safe are those who are Muslim. And when I say Muslim, is people who submit to God, who obey God's rules. So what are God's rules? And when I say that, Christians, true Christians who truly follow the precepts of the Bible, they also fall under this phrase Muslim. They might not be parts of the organization that has taken that name on for itself, but in the essence, that name means obedience to God, people who submit to God, and that encompasses them as well. In any case, going back to the Quran, God says, the fornicator shall not marry any but a fornicatress or an idolatress, and the fornicatress none shall marry her but a fornicator or an idolater. And it is forbidden to the believers. So if you are a person who fears God, if you are a person who reveres God, for you it is forbidden to desire these people, to marry these people, because these people are immoral. And if you are a fornicator, then you will never be with a right person. Because people who are going to treat you with respect, who are going to actually be there for you, who are not going to lie to you, not going to cheat on you, not going to use you and abuse you, they are only not going to do that because they revere God. And everybody is fighting temptation, and you need God to fight temptation. So God also says in chapter 24, verse 26, impure women, al-kabithatu, and I'm probably not pronouncing that right, for impure men, wal-kabithuna, and impure men for impure women, and pure women for pure men, and pure men for pure women. These are not affected what people say. For them there is a forgiveness and an honorable reward. So going back to the chapter 24, verse 3, where it says, the fornicator shall not marry any but a fornicatress or an idolatress, and in light of what I just read in regards to evil men for evil women, or impure men for impure women, and impure women for impure men, if your heart is sick, you are going to look for people that indulge that sickness, right? So you're going to look for sexual deviancies or whatever else it is that you desire, and that's what you're going to get. And when you get these people, they're going to be just as deviant as you, although you may not notice that. And ultimately, you are going to experience pain and suffering. You're going to wake up old person alone, and you're going to regret every choice that you made in life. So, I mean, that should be obvious that that's happening, because 50% of American marriages end in divorce. There's so much single parents out there, especially females, who are stuck with children. There's so much murder of children. Over almost 1 million children a year are murdered because of this behavior. So, if you want to teach people not to sexually assault, teach men not to sexually assault women, then you got to teach women to be strong and to be confident and to understand who the predators are and who the right men are, and to choose appropriately. And the only way to do that is through faith. If you want to save the vulnerable people in our society, then you have to reinstitute faith in it. Otherwise, victims are going to be victims and predators are going to be predators, and there's nothing you can do about that. So again, God also says in the Quran in chapter 2, verse 221, and do not marry the idolatresses until they believe. And certainly a believing servant is better than an idolatrous woman. Even though she should please you, even though if she's beautiful, if she's popular, if whatever, she might be beautiful on the outside, but generally, like all of us, people without God, people like that are corrupt because they have choices. And it's very easy for them to go astray. And then he says, and do not give in marriage to idolaters until they believe. And certainly a believing servant is better than an idolater, though he should please you. So if you have a man who doesn't believe in God, even though if he's rich or powerful or whatever, it's better to give your daughter to a believing servant who will treat her right within the defined framework by God than a man that's going to abuse her in whatever way. And then the verse ends, these invite to the fire, and God invites to the garden and to forgiveness by his will, and makes clear his communications to people that they may be mindful. And of course, we have to recognize this. These people do invite to the fire. So if you get married to someone who does not serve God, they will put pressure on you not to serve God yourself. And there's an example in the Quran. I don't remember exactly which chapter, but it talks about the wife of the Pharaoh, right? She was against what he was doing, but she couldn't do anything about it. But she was able to resist him, so God gives her as an example of believing women. And then God also gives an example of disbelieving people, the wives of Lot and I forget who the other one is. But they were both with servants of God, but they put pressure on them, and of course the prophets were able to resist them. But again, these are, whether male or female, if you end up with a wrong person, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to get hurt. And the only way not to end up with a wrong person is to hear God. Like, listen to this. This is very important, especially if you consider yourself a Muslim. This is very, very important. This will spare you decades of pain and suffering if you just hear it and just do what it says. And then the last thing that I want to say is God tells us how to kind of get to that state. So what do we covet? We covet what we see. So for example, taking pornography an example, people who watch pornography are clearly more predisposed to sexual deviancy, and it just messes up your mind. It puts your mind in a certain mind frame, so you desire what you see. And when you see that, when you constantly watch that, then you start to desire that sexual deviancy, and that sexual deviancy only comes from people who are impure, immoral, driven by their desires, basically animals, whether male or female. So that's the first part. So God says in the Quran, chapter 24, verse 30, tell the believing men to lower their gaze and guard their chastity. That is pure for them. Surely God is aware of what they do. And then God, in the next verse, God also says the same for the women. And tell the believing women that they cast down their looks and guard their chastity, and do not display their adornments except what is apparent thereof. And let them wear their head coverings over their bosoms, and do not display their adornments. And then it just lists a bunch of categories of people. And then it says, and let them not strike their feet, so what they hide of their adornments may be known. And turn to God, all of you, O believers, that you may be successful. So God tells both men and women, tell the men not to look at that, learn not to be tempted by it. And tells the women, believing women, don't try to tempt men, because when you put out bait like that, when you put yourself out on Instagram and you're trying to use your body as a thing to prop yourself up, you're going to get a lot of men. You are going to get a lot of men, but you're going to get mostly wolves. You're going to get mostly wolves, and you're going to regret your choices eventually. So that's it. We are the destroyers of our own lives. And the warnings are clear. Prophets brought warnings. The prophet said, look, this is what it is. Whether you want to follow it or not, that's your problem. That's what the Quran says. God don't need us to follow this. This is for us. This is for us in order to be able to prove that we can coexist in heaven with other people, because we are not driven by our desires, but with our desire to serve God. And through that desire, we become enlightened people. We become something more than an animal. And if we don't, then we bear the consequences of our choices. That is especially important in relationships. Look around you. Everybody's suffering, and nobody wants to admit that they're suffering because we have abandoned God. And that is why all these social theorists and all these, attempts at correcting the situation are going to fail miserably, because they are simply illogical. They are neglecting to recognize the nature of men and women. They are neglecting to recognize that the only way to fix injustice on a social level is to fix it on a personal level. And the only way through that is, like Washington said, through religion. And I don't mean organizations. I mean Scripture. Organizations have corrupted the Scriptures. They've made up rules and excuses. That's all they did. They just made up a bunch of excuses. Scripture is very specific. It says, do this or suffer the consequences in this world and the next. So that's it.